Originally, I'd already written it. I'd already written it. It was part of that was this was one of the things that got cut out of that first draft of book one. So when I originally wrote it and my editor was like, it's great. It's not going to fit in this story if you want any chance of it not being 1,000 pages. It takes away too much. It's like you're introducing a whole other world, a whole other magic system, a whole other, like, maybe save it for another book. So I did, but I still wanted Rheynia in the story. So it ended up being, I'm just going to move her timeline a little bit. And so I'd had the ideas. It evolved a lot, but what was most fun about Rheynia's story is that it's really between her and her sister, and they are two sisters who are raised very differently because they're separated at a pretty young age. I'm really exploring the nature versus nurture, the effect of a single trauma on two different people, how two different people respond to the same trauma, and the inability to, like, there's a lot of times where they're so close to connecting on something, and they're communicating as effectively as they know how to do, but they just can't quite connect on an emotional level that would allow them each the catharsis they need. So it was very difficult to write that type of relationship. Like throughout the Eventual Realm trilogy, I explore a lot of different relationships. The one that I would say is not present on page at all is the sister-sister relationship. So it got its own book because it was something that I think is so complex. Yes, sibling dynamics, that I do quite a bit of that, but specifically the sister-sister relationship, and especially when there's an age gap, especially when there's a separation and a diversion, but a division between them, and having them both want very different things for very understandable reasons, but at the same time, they need to do whatever they're going to do. If they're going to be successful, they need to agree and they need to do it together. So my wife tells this story all the time of, when I was a kid, me and my sister wouldn't get along, and my dad would literally tie us to a tree together until we could get along. And I'm like, wow, we're not going to do that. But that concept of what happens, what do you do? How do you get along when you don't get along? What's the what are the means of creating a connection and finding understanding and common ground when everything in your being is telling you, I don't trust you, I can't trust you, and I won't trust you? So I that was the most fun and also the most difficult and challenging part of that story. As much as the Skeleton King is a big part of it, it's really how do these sisters contend with this world that is ruled with the iron and skeletal fists of the Skeleton King. There's another character in the trilogy who has kind of a long history. She's an immortal, chosen by the gods to help defeat this one true god, but it's kind of a long plan in the making. So her story actually takes place like 350 years before the events of the trilogy. So a long time in the making. So the way I was originally telling it in that first draft was through interludes. You would just get little chunks, little bits, little bits, little bits, so that the reader's kind of figuring out along the way, like, okay, I understand what's happening in the mortal realm, but this is what's happening in the divine realm. This is what has been happening. But it was just too much. So the story that I'm telling now, I'm in the middle of writing that first book. That'll be a 4-book series. But that is, the first book is called Boon Blessed. And it's kind of like a Hunger Games element of they're competing for the god's favor. There's the god will bestow a boon, but with the boon comes a bane. So the abilities to control different magical elements, but at the same time contending with them. So from a magic system carryover in a Vengeful Realm, all of the magics require a balancing of the scales, as is the title. But within that balancing of the scales, it's almost always a physical manifestation of that. Whereas in this story, in Boon Blessed, the banes that come with these magical abilities also need to be balanced, but they're balanced on more of a mental, emotional standpoint. So I'm exploring some deeper things of, through my own healing, but also there's an element of, when you use shadow magic, for example, there's almost a reflex, like you're more prone to depressive states. When you use magic that's harnessing the energy of the sun, you're more prone to having anxious panic attack type things. So using the different magics has the same balancing of the scales, but on an internal emotional level. So that was a big thing that I wanted to explore. I couldn't do that in this book as well, just too many magic systems, but I'm really looking forward to this one. It's some of the history we learn over the course of a Vengeful Realm. Over the course of the trilogy, we learn some of the history of not just the mortal realm, but the divine realm. And this is taking that little snippet that I put in the trilogy and expounding upon it heavily. So there's one of the gods, the god of beasts, rebels against the other gods, and this causes a huge uproar amongst the mortals. And how do the mortals contend with it? So that is part of the history associated with a Vengeful Realm, but it's also happening on this opposite side of the world. And it's these people at this time dealing with the same thing that's part of the history. So there's little Easter eggs. If you had read, you'd be able to go, oh, okay, I recognize this is the god from this thing who did that thing, and this is why this is happening. But otherwise, you could read this and have no context of that, and you'd still have an enjoyable read. You could read this first, come back to that. So I wanted that kind of interplay, exchangeability